Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ron, and today we are going to be going over 5 very fun gunner builds in Deep Rock Galactic. These are super fun builds. We've already went over some strong builds, and I do plan on adding more to that playlist, so we'll get even more strong builds there, because there's a lot of really good builds in Deep Rock. These are just for fun builds, though. Some of them still are legitimately strong. Others are a little bit gimmicky, but that's kind of what adds the charm to them. So let's get right into this. Our very first build is going with the zero accuracy build. This build is great if you cannot aim whatsoever, or maybe you're playing on a controller that you've never played with, or maybe you just wanted to crank the sensitivity all the way up, or maybe you drank some Blackout Stout and you just need to shoot everything. So we are going to be using the Bloodstorm minigun as our primary weapon, and we are going to be using the overclock Bullet Hell. This is one of my absolute favorite overclocks in the entire game. This one makes it so you lose out on some damage for the minigun. I think it's 3 damage in total. But now all of your shots have a 75% chance of ricocheting from anything, whether that be hitting the ground, hitting the walls, hitting the ceiling, hitting other bugs, and then bouncing into nearby bugs. This can be kind of cool too, because you can use it for trick shots, so if enemies are behind walls, or if you aren't really sure if there's enemies in a certain area, you can fire this in. It's also really good for picking off things like jellyfish, and it's very useful for scouting ahead for leeches. Oh, the other downside to this one is that your gun is now 600% less accurate, which is a lot. It's going to be kind of difficult to hold this on target. So this is usually the build that I run when using Bullet Hell. We are going with increased accuracy in Tier 1, so we can actually start hitting big targets. It's still not as accurate as just the regular minigun, or any variant of the minigun, but it's accurate enough to still be hitting things consistently at even longer ranges. In Tier 2, we're going with damage. This is so that we get to 19 damage. Otherwise, it takes 3 shots to kill a Swarmer, at least on Hazard 4 and 5, and that's a little bit annoying. You could go with extra ammo here, though, if you really want. This one's your choice. In Tier 3, I go with blow-through rounds. This is so that we can potentially get even more value. The stun in this tier is actually pretty good, too, and even armor breaking isn't horrible. Pick whichever one of these you'd like. Tier 4, it's personal preference. Take any of these. I like the faster spin up, but if you want more damage or the better cooling, you can take that too. And then in Tier 5, I go with fire bullets. This is just so that we can potentially get more value out of this. Cold as the Grave can potentially work, but this one is already a little bit inconsistent, so your cooling might not be that great. Aggressive venting's okay though, because at least then if you do overheat your minigun, you'll deal AoE damage to everything. You're basically already dealing AoE damage with this particular build, so it's not entirely necessary, and that's why I usually take the fire bullets. And then we are going to be pairing this with the revolver as our secondary, and we are going to be taking magic bullets on it. Now, magic bullets is legitimately a really good overclock. This one is very similar to Bullet Hell, though, where it lowers your overall damage. Not as much, but we will be lowering it more with the explosive rounds. We did have this in our strong builds, and magic bullets is a really strong overclock. We're going to be building it the exact same way, too. What magic bullets does is when you hit a surface, or when you hit an enemy, at least in the weak spot, your round will then bounce into another nearby enemy, so long as there is an enemy for it to bounce into within 5 meters of that shot. You also get more ammo with this overclock, which is pretty nice. The way I build magic bullets is just like this, so faster reloads in Tier 1 because we don't need accuracy. Doesn't matter if we're all that accurate with magic bullets. Extra ammo in Tier 2 so we can get even more use out of it. Explosive rounds in Tier 3. This way we actually gain damage when we take the explosive rounds, and it really helps with our Tier 5 with the chemical rounds. In Tier 4, we are going to the extra ammo, and then in Tier 5, the neurotoxin rounds. This is so that we can have explosive neurotoxin rounds so it can spread to multiple enemies. Every shot has a chance of splashing neurotoxin to all enemies near it, and this also counts for the ricochet as well. So you have essentially 2 chances to splash poison to multiple enemies. This slows them down, highlights them, and deals damage over time. It's also really good for taking care of regenerative bugs. This is a super fun build, and it can be taken on most missions. There is one major downside to this build, though. Actually, there's a couple major downsides. First one is that you don't do a ton of single target damage. This is much more of an AoE build than single target damage. It's not way great for fighting dreadnoughts, especially. It's not great against oppressors. It's not great against Praetorians. It can still kill Praetorians, and if you're focusing them down, magic bullets or bullet hell are likely just bouncing all around and hitting everything else around it. So you're still dealing with swarms very well, and you can deal with those big enemies. It's just the really big enemies you're not dealing very much damage to, and you can also run through ammo with this build particularly fast. Our second build, I'm going to be calling the Plasma Cowboy build. So for a primary weapon, we're going to be taking the Hurricane Guided Rocket System, and we're going to be pairing this with Plasma Burster Missiles. This one is a bounced overclock that actually has a lot of downsides and looks pretty bad on paper, but it's legitimately really good so long as you can get value out of it. Unfortunately, the rockets still sometimes explode on the ground, and I really wish that would get fixed. But this makes it so all of your missiles do less damage, both in terms of direct damage and AoE damage. They also have a smaller explosion radius, and you get overall less ammo. Also, your missiles move slower. So all those are downsides, but your missiles can explode multiple times, and they can pierce through an enemy. So you can have a missile go through, have it explode, come back through, and you can just sit this on one single target or sit it on multiple targets. The way that I build this is somewhat like this, although it is pretty flexible and I do build it multiple different ways. In Tier 1, I take more ammo just so that we can use it more often. Tier 2, this one's completely your choice. If you want armor breaking, take that, or if you want the faster moving missiles, you can take that. Right now I have it built for faster moving missiles. Faster rate of fire in Tier 3, this is just so that you can shoot out missiles a little bit quicker and control them. However, you can only have out a total of 18 missiles at once. So don't keep spamming this at longer ranged enemies. Make sure that you wait for your missiles to actually get there. That way you're not using up extra ammo that you didn't need to. Weak spot damage in Tier 4, because it's easy to hit the weak spot on any enemy with this, because you can just weave it right through them. And then I have the stun in Tier 5, but the nitroglycerin compound, or even the fire rounds, is okay. The fire rounds is only really great if you want to put fire on enemies. It actually handicaps your damage a decent amount. Stun is pretty consistent across the board on every mission, unless it's like a Dreadnought mission where you can't stun them, but you can still stun other bugs. And then the nitroglycerin is probably the best used on this overclock, because your missiles have the longest amount of travel time, and they can be ramping up damage the whole time that you're controlling them. So if you want even more damage out of it, you can build it that way, and that is a fun way to play it. There is also something that should be noted with the Plasma Burster missiles that has been in the game ever since, well, the Hurricane's been in the game. You can one-shot the flying rocks on escort missions with them, with just one rocket. And since your rocket doesn't die after just one hit, you can actually weave this around to make it destroy multiple rocks. I still don't know why that's still in the game, but it's a really cool feature, and it makes Plasma Burster missiles legitimately really good on escort missions. For a secondary, we're going to be pairing this once again with the revolver, except for this time we're going to be taking 6-shooter. I mean, what Cowboy wouldn't have a 6-shooter, right? So what 6-shooter does is let you fire much faster, and you get 6 rounds of the gun, and you get more ammo, but it does come at the cost of a longer reload, and you also have more base spread. So the way that I built this is like this. So we're going with faster reloads in Tier 1, but you could go with the increased accuracy in Tier 1 too. You could go with either one of these in Tier 1, whether it's the faster reload or the more accuracy. Both are really good in this particular build. Going with the extra ammo or the damage in Tier 2, because it's kind of interchangeable with Tier 4, at least the way that I build it, where I go damage in one, ammo in the other. Weak spot damage in Tier 3, then the run and gun ability in Tier 5. In my opinion, 6-shooter is just a straight upgrade to the revolver in pretty much every aspect. The downsides are so minimal that it's pretty easy to compensate for. Having multiple shots and having more ammo is always great, and just being able to spam this, especially against large enemies, lets you kill them even quicker. And if you are one of those people that really like to run and gun, it's great for picking off long-range things like MacTerra or the Spitters. Then we're going to move on to our third fun build, and this one is the full ammo build gunner. If you thought bullet hell or plasma burster missiles was just not doing it for you and you needed all the bullets that you could possibly hold in the game, this is the build for you. So we are going to be taking the minigun as our primary weapon, and for an overclock we're going to be taking compact feed mechanism. This gives you 800 additional ammo at the cost of 4 rate of fire. The 4 rate of fire is honestly not too noticeable with the minigun. Now, you could just take the extra rate of fire in Tier 1, which is a pretty good option, and you essentially have no downside for this. It's just an upgrade to your ammo. I usually don't. I keep this pretty much my standard minigun build. So in Tier 1, I go with the reduced spread, just very nice for picking off long-range things. Since we're going with full ammo, we have to take the ammo in Tier 2. This gets us to the insane amount of ammo of 3,800 rounds. You nearly have 4,000 rounds of ammunition for the minigun when you're building like this, and it takes you a very long time to run out of ammo, and whenever you get a resupply, you get a lot back. It's very, very weird to see that you're at half of your total ammo when using like your laser pointer or looking at just the HUD, and it says you have half ammo when you still have like 2,000 rounds with your minigun. Kind of a bizarre but fun feeling. In Tier 3, I go with blow-through rounds so we get even more value out of every shot because we can potentially hit 2 enemies this way, but any of them in Tier 3 are pretty good. Tier 4, again, personal preference. I like the faster spin-up, but any of them are fine. And then Tier 5, I like going with Cold of the Grave. This is so that we can keep shooting the minigun. And then for a secondary, since we want the most amount of ammo, we are going to go with the Burst Pistol. And we are going to be pairing this with Micro Flechettes. What Micro Flechettes does is it pretty much halves your overall damage. You lose out on 11 damage in total, which is a pretty huge amount. But you get an increase to your magazine by 30. you get double the amount of maximum ammo, and this does stack with the max amount of ammo that you can have, so we can have even more ammo with this. And we also get 50% less recoil and spread from every shot, so it makes the gun extremely accurate, which is great for the tier 5, which we'll talk about in a second. This is the way that I build it, although there is a couple different ways that you could build this, and this isn't really the best build that you can have for micro flechettes. You don't need this much ammo, and you don't need the extra mag size. It's fun to have, but it's not entirely necessary. That being said, this is the full ammo build, so we need to have the most amount of ammo. In tier 1, I go with damage, but realistically, any of these are fine in tier 1. Increased accuracy makes it so the burst pistol is pretty much laser accurate at any range. It's really great for picking off spitters that way. But blow-through rounds is also a really good option because you can get potentially more value out of this, and you have a whole lot of bullets, so you're probably going to be spraying it pretty often. In tier 2, it's kind of your choice too. I wouldn't recommend the recoil reduction. It's not necessary since we already have the overclock doing that. So you probably want to go with the faster rate of fire or with the faster reload. I usually go with faster reload. Tier 3, you're going with the bigger mag size, although if you want a stronger build, you should probably go with the damage over the mag size because you don't need to hold 66 rounds of ammunition in your gun before you need to reload. That's a little bit crazy. 54 rounds is way more than enough. In tier 4, we're going with extra ammo because we need that extra ammo, and now we have 384 rounds outside of the gun and 66 in the gun. It takes you a very long time to run out of ammo with this one too. And then in tier 5, we were going with the stun. Stun on the burst pistol, especially with micro flechettes, is extremely useful because the stun lasts a decent amount of time, and with micro flechettes giving you a ton more ammo, even though it costs you damage, that doesn't really matter if the enemy can't fight back, and with 50% less spread and recoil, it just makes it that much easier for you to actually get your stun on targets. So I've done this build a couple of times, and I have a dedicated video talking about this particular build, and why it's not always a great idea to just go for full ammo, and why it's kind of important to try to hit breakpoints on different enemies. You're probably not going to kill things extremely fast with this build. You will kill them, definitely. You'll kill them over time, and it takes you a very long time to run out of ammo. So if you are still killing them at a reasonable pace, this build still isn't that bad. You're going to do missions a little bit slower than other builds. Gunner in general kind of does missions slower than most of the other classes anyway, mostly because you don't have a great movement tool. Your zip lines are really good, but they are quite slow too. But this one makes it so you're even slower than you otherwise would be, where if you went with a high damaging either primary or secondary weapon with either one of these, you would probably get better results than just stacking all the amount of ammo on it. I think that this build can really succeed more in a team setting than necessarily in a solo setting. In a solo setting, it can still work, but in a team setting, it can do much better, especially if you have a really high damaging engineer, or a really high damaging scout, or even a really high damaging driller, or another gunner that's built more for damage, because you can potentially just keep giving them your spare resupplies. You're not going to go through all of them. You really aren't. You really don't need a whole lot of resupplies on this particular build. You can probably skip every other resupply. Maybe you can skip 2 resupplies with how much ammo you'll have. Onto our 4th fun build, we have the Tank Gunner. This one's actually legitimately good. This one's a really strong. I'll tell you why too. It's because the shield values you get are kind of crazy. You get 50% damage reduction, which scales on every difficulty, and it scales with everything. You can actually stack that even higher, and there's also a glitch that you can do to where you can basically have it permanent. I'll be explaining all of that in just one second. We're going to be taking the Thunderhead Heavy Autocannon as our primary weapon, and then for an overclock we are going to be taking Combat Mobility. What Combat Mobility does is it increases the amount of movement speed you have when firing the autocannon. Usually you're locked at 50%, so you move significantly slower when firing this than just walking around normally. This raises it to 85%. This is pretty noticeable. You're still not going to be outrunning bugs on Hazard 4 or 5, because on Hazard 4 bugs are moving at 100% speed, so they will catch up to you. And on Hazard 5, I believe bugs are moving at 115 speed, so they're going to catch up to you pretty much regardless, unless you have something that's buffing your speed. And Gunner's weapons do not buff your speed. This also increases your minimum rate of fire and your rate of fire scaling. It gives you less spread, but it also cuts down on your magazine size. You only have 50 rounds in the magazine now. That can be a little bit annoying because you're going to need to reload it more often. If you're a fan of Born Ready, I would definitely suggest taking that. I would suggest taking that anytime that you're using the autocannon, or really the Hurricane for that matter on Gunner. The way that I built the autocannon for Tank Gunner is like this. So I'm going with extra ammo in Tier 1 because you get so much ammo for the autocannon. This just makes it so you don't really have to worry about resupplies throughout the majority of the mission, really, either playing solo or playing in multiplayer. Fast rate of fire in Tier 2, the reason why we go with that fast rate of fire is because we can hit our maximum top rate of fire within just 2 shots. That's important for our shield in tier 5, or for the damage in tier 5 if you want to go with that. I'm going to the extra direct damage in tier 3, but you could really pick any of those in tier 3, whichever one you want. Armor breaking in tier 4, this helps deal with regular grunts and even things like guards a little bit easier, slashers too. Helps you kind of deal with everything. You don't really need the extra AoE with this particular build because you're going to be moving around fairly quickly. And then in tier 5, we are going with the shield. What the shield does is give you a flat amount of damage reduction. It says 50%. I've heard differing responses saying that it's bugged and it's actually 50%, or it's supposed to be 30%, or vice versa. Either way, it gives you damage resist. It doesn't really matter how much. But when you're at full rate of fire, you are getting damage reduction. And since it only takes 2 shots for you to reach your maximum rate of fire with this particular build, you're getting damage reduction pretty much immediately. And this is damage reduction from everything. This is not just from bugs. This is not just from robots. This is also from fall damage, from environmental hazards, from friendly fire. Everything gets the damage reduction on it. That's kind of important because with Gunner, your zipline is still kind of bugged, at least as far as I know, where when you use your zipline launcher and you have disconnection protection on it, you get the permanent fall damage reduction from disconnection protection until you actually go down. And this applies to everybody. This isn't just for Gunner. This is everybody who uses your zipline if you have disconnection protection. If you attach yourself to it, you get permanent fall damage reduction until you actually die, or until you actually go down and then get picked up again. Then you have to go grab another zip line and then it resets itself. On top of that, you can actually stack even more damage reduction because you can take Veteran Depositor, and Veteran Depositor makes it so you have damage reduction so long as you're standing next to either Molly or next to a deposit site, whatever that might be, whether that be the ship or whether that be the rig on certain missions. Now, if that didn't sound crazy enough, our secondary is going to make it seem even more crazy, and this might actually legitimately be one of the easiest builds to do one of the higher difficulties on. If you're struggling with Hazard 4 and 5, I would heavily recommend trying this, especially if you have this particular overclock. For a secondary, we're taking the coil gun, and we are taking triple tech chamber, which is a very strong overclock, but it's also kind of bugged at the moment, where it's even stronger than it should be. So what triple tech chamber does is allow you to fire up to 3 shots from your coil gun. They have to be in fairly quick succession after one another. The thing is, it doesn't really matter for this build. I mean, you're going to mostly be using this just to kind of snipe with or to get this bug working. You can pretty much just use the autocannon for basically everything because everything's going to be like close to medium range where you're fighting it, and if you combine that with your shield, it takes you a really, really long time to die. Something kind of important to note, though, about the second and third shot is that they actually don't do terrain damage. So if you're going to shoot through a wall and hit something like a leech, the first shot will do that, but the second and third shot will not. So treat them just like regular shots. They are still very accurate and still quite powerful. This also does consume overall ammo, but that's okay. The way that I build triple tech chamber is like this. So in tier 1, I'm going with extra ammo, but you can take whatever you want. In tier 1, they're honestly all pretty good. Tier 2, faster reload speed. Again, this is your choice. Pick whichever one of these you want. You can kind of do some fun stuff with the magnetic flow in tier 2 as well. I'll let you experiment with that. In tier 3, I like taking the stun, although the fear is also really good. Tier 4, I would highly, highly, highly recommend that you take the damage reduction. The reason for this is that when you fully fire out all 3 shots with triple tech chamber, there's a very high chance that the damage reduction becomes basically permanent on you, to where you just take 50% or 30%, whatever it is, depending on if it's bugged or saying the right thing or not. You have that amount of damage reduction pretty much permanently on you. And this can also stack with other damage reduction. So you become very tanky with this just after firing it once. You can even put the coil gun away. It's not only when you're holding out the coil gun. It's just that it seems to trigger pretty often. And sometimes I've noticed that it's gone away with other damage reduction stacking. So it's a little bit iffy if you want to do that. You may only want to take the coil gun if you want to, like, seriously just have a strong build for tanking through stuff and ignore the other stuff, but it's more fun to kind of stack all of them on top of one another. It also seems like it runs out when you run completely out of ammo with the coil gun. Not sure why that is, but I also don't know why it's actually working like all the time. And then in tier 5, I go with electric trails. Since we're firing out 3, this just works as pretty good CC on anything, so it either slows stuff down, or you can use it kind of in a line so that enemies running through it will get slowed down and take passive damage. It's also just really good for dealing a little bit more damage to big things like Praetorians or Menaces or whatever it might be. And then for our final build, I don't really have a name for this one. I guess it's just kind of like an explosive shotgun build with some extra CC on top of that. I don't know. Help me come up with a cool name for this particular loadout. So for a primary weapon, we're going to be running the Hurricane once again, and we're going to be taking this with Salvo Module. What Salvo Module lets you do is essentially just charge up your shots, so you no longer can guide your rockets, sort of. You kind of can, but you have to tap fire them one at a time, and then they're still guided rockets normally. But you can't just hold down the trigger and fire them. Once you hold down the trigger, you engage this salvo module where it loads up rockets, up to 9 of them. Once you release it, it fires them out, pretty much like a shotgun. And for every rockets you have loaded in there, it deals extra damage to any enemies that it hits, which is pretty nice. The way that I build this is usually like this, so going with extra ammo in tier 1, but you can pick whichever you want in tier 1, they're all pretty good. I like going with the armor breaking in tier 2. The faster rate of fire in tier 3 really helps because this also counts for your charge up speed. Tier 4 I go with extra AoE damage because we are using this like a shotgun. It's more difficult to hit weak spots with the shotgun, unless you just get right up next to something to hit it in the weak spot with this, then it's an okay option. And then I like going with the stun in tier 5, but I know plenty of people really like the napalm rounds in tier 5 as well, because it's very easy to just shotgun this out and light big things on fire and then switch over to something like the volatile bullets. We're not going to be running volatile bullets with this. Instead, we are going to be running the burst pistol as our secondary, and we are going to be taking electro minelets with this. Electro minelets is a very fun overclock. What it does is the same thing as cryo minelets for the Zhukovs, except for their electric minelets on the burst pistol. These rounds will stick into the ground, and then they will arm themselves. If anything steps across them or steps close to them, this will go off, electrocuting all enemies around it and dealing damage over time. This comes with very little downside to the gun too. It's basically just the smaller magazine size and slightly less damage, but the electric mines are going to make up for that damage. Either way, this is the way that I build it. Blow through rounds with the minelets is very good because this lets you hit an enemy with the regular bullet, have the bullet still go through the enemy, become a minelet underneath them, and then explode or hit other enemies that are coming up behind them. So this is just really good with any of the minelets, whether it be cryo minelets or electro minelets. Faster reloads in tier 2. This is your choice. Pick whichever one you want in tier 2. More damage in tier 3. You could go with the large mag size if it bothers you that you only have 12 rounds, but 12 rounds is usually enough in most situations with this gun. Extra ammo in tier 4. This just makes the most amount of sense because the electro minelets themselves are going to be doing a lot of damage. And then the stun in tier 5 because it's kind of nice to stun enemies and then also have them get electrocuted underneath, or stun something in front and then electrocute something in the back. This particular build doesn't really struggle with too much because the burst pistol is quite good at longer ranges and it makes for pretty consistent crowd control when you have the electro minelets on, at least with the blow through rounds. And the hurricane does massive damage to both crowds and to single targets so long as you can get close with those charged salvo modules. And even if you can't, you can still tap fire it and hit things at longer ranges. So even things like MacTerra are not super difficult to deal with this particular build. It's also just super fun and visually interesting. There was some suggestions for another fun variant of this build, and that's going with all mines. So this would be mine layer system on the Hurricane with electro mine lids. And if I do another 5 fun builds, that one's definitely going to show up on there because it is pretty fun. It's just it kind of lacks against flying enemies and sometimes spitters, and it's also not way great against things like menaces or spitballers. But it is a super fun build, especially against crowds. So these were 5 very fun builds. I would recommend you check all of them out, as well as tell me what your favorite gunner builds are down below, just whichever ones you find the most fun to play with, whether they be really strong, really dumb, really strong and really dumb, whatever it might be. Tell me down in the comments below. I'd love to hear. Thanks everybody for watching this. I really do appreciate it. And special thanks to the supporters of this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube, patrons over on Patreon. They get early access to videos just like this. And if you would like to be a part of it, you can. There is a link down in the description. And if you would like to see more of my Deep Rock Galactic builds, be sure to click over here on this playlist. That'll take you to a full list of them. Thanks. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.